Magic's new set, Foundations, is almost here. An introduction to the game for new players, and a baseline of the power of Standard from here forward, at least for a little while. And now that all of the cards from it have been officially revealed, it's looking like a really cool set. As is tradition on this channel, we are going to be counting down the top 10 new Pauper Commanders from the set. Now, alongside Foundations is a sort of sister set, Foundations Jumpstart, which despite the name is not really very related. It features a whole bunch of different new cards that are not standard legal, but for the purposes of Pauper Commander, they're still perfectly fine there, so we're going to be including them in our roundup. What's weird to me about Foundations Jumpstart is that it's a Jumpstart set. For Jumpstart, the entire contents of a pack is randomly chosen from a list of packs. So even though these new cards are given rarity, they're not necessarily easier or harder to find than any other rarity. The entire pack comes as one set. If you're getting the uncommon, you're getting the commons too. All that said, Foundations and Foundations Jumpstart is looking to have some very cool cards that we get to play with as Pauper Commander players. As a reminder for anyone new coming into the format, Pauper Commander is played with 99 commons in your deck and one uncommon creature acting as your commander. Just like in Commander, this creature tells you your color identity that your entire rest of your deck has to adhere to, but unlike Commander, it does not have to be legendary. So with that, let's count down our top 10 Foundations Pauper Commanders. Number 10, Ivora, Insatiable Air. Ivora is a 2-mana 1/1 legendary creature vampire warrior from Jumpstart. You're going to notice this a lot. There are a ton of uncommon legends in these two sets, and also Jumpstart shows up a lot. I definitely ended up picking more Jumpstart commanders than Foundations proper commanders. Ivora says Trample. When Ivora Insatiable Air enters, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a blood token. Whenever you discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Ivora. To unpack this, they have this entered effect, and when they deal combat damage, you get a blood token. Blood tokens are artifacts that you can spend 1, tap them, sacrifice them, and discard a card to then draw a card. They let you rummage through your deck, which can be quite useful, but generally considered one of the least interesting artifact tokens. However, whenever you discard a card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Ivora. This means that even on her own, with no additional support from your deck, she can be growing very consistently. She still have to get in-combat damage to get additional blood tokens, so unless you have a way of pumping her other than her ability, she's going to struggle. But that's the whole point, is that Ivora gives us the opportunity to make a discard matter deck. Discard Matter is really hard to pull off well. I've definitely tried my fair share at Madness decks in the past, and they are kind of a pain. Having this payoff for discard looks really nice, and being able to rummage through your deck, it's going to let you find the more important spells for whatever current situation you find yourself in, while growing this trampling creature to swing in for the win. Number 9, Sutina, Speaker of the Tajuru. Sutina is a 3-mana 2/2 green legendary creature elf scout from Jumpstart. Sutina reads, when Sutina, Speaker of the Tajuru, enters, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Whenever Sutina attacks, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. First ability, she's a 3-mana ramp spell on a stick, get a 2/2 body that you can cast from the command zone. That's already really quite good. The second ability, though, is pretty odd. I think a lot of people are going to look at it and go, I just don't want this. It's not worth it to me to bounce a land to my hand just to get a +1/+1 counter. And that's fair, but I think that the benefit of the bounce is not the +1/+1 counter, but the bounce itself. Sutina makes a great commander for a landfall deck. If you can be bouncing your forests back to your hand and then playing them again, even though this isn't going to give you multiple landfall triggers in a turn, other than its first DTB, it's not letting you ramp, it's not giving you extra land drops, but it does mean that in that late game when you don't have a handful of lands, you can trigger all your landfalls once every turn, guaranteed. Which has some value, but admittedly, I think there's a lot better options for landfall, and well, that's why this is 9 and not higher up. Number 8, Samia, Milesian Poet. Samia is a 3-mana 1/1 white legendary creature human bard from Jumpstart. Samia reads, whenever you cast your first enchantment spell each turn, create a 2/2 white nymph enchantment creature token. At the beginning of each combat, if you control 5 or more enchantments, Samia, Milesian Poet, gets +4/+4 and gains lifelink until end of turn. Being able to create a token every turn is always very good. That said, there are a ton of commanders that just do that. They make a 1/1 soldier or a 1/1 bird or something every turn if you jump through a specific hoop. This hoop is just kind of interesting. If you don't build your deck right, you're not going to be casting enchantment every turn. But if you do, then you are, and this gives you an excuse to be doing that. It gives you a reason to be making an enchantment deck. Now, there are a ton of options for enchantment matters in the command zone, so it's not doing anything super original, but making a 2/2 instead of a 1/1 like a lot of other token generators is a significant difference. And that later mode of becoming a 5/5 with lifelink is going to be able to really help you stabilize in the middle of the game and have them continue to be a reasonable threat and not just a token creator. Now you have to keep in mind this is not a passive, they have +4/+4 while you have 5 or more enchantments. It only triggers at the beginning of combat. However, if it's not combat, they just die to any random single point of damage, so you're going to have to watch out for that and give them some protection. That said, if you're an enchantment deck, you have plenty of options for protection, so I don't think it's going to be much of an issue. Number 7, Vampire Gourmand. Vampire Gourmand is a 2-mana 2/2 black vampire from Foundations. We finally got there, something that's not Jumpstart and not legendary. Vampire Gourmand reads, whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card, and this creature can't be blocked this turn. So I first saw this card and thought, wow, that doesn't seem very good. Am I going to want to be sacrificing creatures all the time? I just get to draw a card, I can't be blocked, it's just a 2/2, do I care? But the more I thought of it, the more I went, well, this is very similar to tap, sacrifice a creature, draw a card, target opponent takes 2 damage. It has the downside that you can only be doing that during combat. You can't sacrifice something that was going to die anyway at instant speed or anything. But as far as sacrifice outlets that you can only do once per turn at sorcery speed, not technically, but that's the equivalent here, it's a really solid effect. Most things that tap to sacrifice something and draw a card cost an additional 2 mana in uncommon. And on top of that, this becomes unblockable and get in for 2 damage. But it's not just 2 damage. This can hold any number of equipment or enchantments that you might want to add an additional rider to combat. So while I'm comparing it to tap, sacrifice, draw a card, deal 2 damage, it's actually better than that in a lot of situations. I struggled a lot with where to put it on this list because I think it's legitimately strong, but I just think the ones higher than this are that much stronger. Number 6, Fire Spitter Welp. Fire Spitter Welp is a 3-mana red 2/2 creature dragon from Jumpstart. Well, kind of. This one's actually interesting in that it got printed in both Foundations and Jumpstart Foundations. Either way, Fire Spitter Welp reads, flying, whenever you cast a non-creature or dragon spell, Fire Spitter Welp deals 1 damage to each opponent. This effect of whenever you cast a non-creature spell, deal 1 damage to each opponent is very common. There's a ton of cards that do this, and a lot that I would say do it better. Now, some only say instants or sorcery, but I mean, Gutter Snipe is instants and sorceries, and that's 2 damage. So that's kind of the bar to be beating for this. And while I wouldn't say this beats Gutter Snipe, I think it goes in a very interesting different direction because not only is it a 2/2 flyer, which is just a much better body than these cards usually have, but it also not only triggers on creatures, but also dragons. This means that you don't have to fill your entire deck with non-creatures. You can pad out your actual bodies and have blockers on the board with dragon spells. This brings us to our obligatory reminder that this is Pauper Commander. Sometimes you will see a card and think, ooh, this looks like an amazing commander, only to later realize that it cares about something that there are no common cards for. And that is something that this could struggle with a bit. There aren't too many options for red common dragons. Dragons tend to be kind of bigger and flashier than that. However, there's not none. There's a good 20 or so that you could put in, and you don't have to put all of them in. Obviously, a lot of your deck's going to be non-creature spells, but this lets you pad out the creature slot of your deck without taking away from the ping of your actual Spellslinger game plan. And while there's not a ton, they're good. They're not ones you're going to be upset to be running. In fact, some of them have adventures, so you get to cast them as non-creature spells and then again as dragons. It actually looks like a legitimately really scary and really fun deck. Number 5, Fiendish Panda. Fiendish Panda is a 4-mana black and white 3/2 bear demon from Foundations. Fiendish Panda reads, whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. When this creature dies, return another target non-bear creature card with mana value less than or equal to this creature's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. At first blush, this is a 4 mana 3/2 that grows when you gain life, which is already okay. There's a decent number of commander options that have basically this exact same first ability. And they're pretty decent. I think they're generally quite good cards. The question becomes, can this compete with those cards? And I'm not sure if it really competes with those cards, but it does go toe-to-toe in a new color identity. If you want to be playing a life gain matters deck with this specific effect, there wasn't a black and white option until now. So just that on its own makes it a reasonably good card. What pushes it up to slot 5 is the second ability of being able to resurrect something when it does inevitably die. Now, if it gets exiled or something, boo-hoo, maybe you want to run a sacrifice outlet so you can kill it before someone else exiles it. I don't know. But this second ability is the ability of Body Launderer, a mythic from New Capenna that was legitimately a powerhouse at the time. In this specific deck, I don't know how much value you're going to get out of that, but it's still very solid to just be able to pull something back. It's a way of being able to put all your eggs in one basket and then keep going, even if that gets destroyed, because you get to pull something else to replace it with. Number 4, Brawlios of Pheres Band. Brawlios is a 5 mana green star legendary creature, Centaur Scout, from Jumpstart. Brawlios reads, Brawlios of Pheres Band's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever Brawlios of Pheres Band attacks, draw a card. Then, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now this is the landfall commander I think is going to actually overperform in this set. Their power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. Even though it doesn't have trample and it might not be able to get in damage, it does often means you're going to be able to make these attacks without worrying that Brawlios is going to be dying, so you can trigger that second ability. Additionally, just on its own, growing based off of lands you control is a strong effect. There are a couple other uncommon creatures that have this ability, but this is probably the best one. It's growing at that really steady rate while also helping that rate go faster if you have the lands in hand. It does cost 5 mana, it does take a while to get down, but if you care about lands, you probably are running ramp, so it's not really going to be taking till turn 5. You get it. It's kind of a perfect landfall commander. Number 3, General Create, the Bolt Bringer. General Create is a 3 mana 2/2 legendary creature goblin soldier from Jumpstart. General Create reads, whenever one or more goblins you control attack, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. Whenever another creature you control enters, General Create, the Bolt Bringer, deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is the first time that the Impact Tremors style effect has been printed on a creature at uncommon, which is huge in my opinion. Without even really being a Impact Tremors deck, you can just run a perfectly normal Goblin deck with this, and you're going to just incidentally get value out of that second ability. That first ability cares about you using Goblins, doesn't really care how many Goblins you have, so you could just be attacking with Create herself if you want to, but if you don't want to risk her, you don't have to. You just have to attack with Goblins. So it's just a really solid Goblin commander, plus an effect that Goblins tend to really like, stapled together in one creature that can start doing things as early as turn 3 because she doesn't even need to be the one attacking. Number 2, Kala, Ajani's Pridemate. Kala, Ajani's Pridemate is a 4 mana white 3/3 legendary creature cat warrior from Jumpstart. Kala reads, whenever Kala, Ajani's Pridemate attacks, other attacking creatures you control get +X +O until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on Kala. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Kala. For 3 and a white, you gain 1 life. As we said before with the Fiendish Panda, this effect of whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on me is pretty common. While that had the benefit of letting you dip into black and getting to res something when it dies, this one buffs your entire board's attack per counter on it. The +1/+1 counters they get from life gain count towards this, and you're probably going to be doing this a lot because it's an easy source of counters, but any counters count. So running any number of ways of putting cheap counters in Kala, while simultaneously going wide so you have the biggest board possible to be buffed by this effect, is going to be absolutely absurd. Normally, I would say the downside is that it's only buffing XO, it's not buffing their actual toughness, but the thing is, that buff is going to your expendable tokens. Kala itself is getting +1/+1 counters when you gain life. You're going to be growing this to a big, healthy toughness that probably won't mind needing to attack to get its trigger. If it does, run some protection. You're in white. It's what you do. And lastly, number 1, Dionis, Elvish Archdruid. Dionis, Elvish Archdruid is a 4-mana, 3/3 green legendary creature, elf druid from Jumpstart. Dionis reads, elves you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it and put a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability triggers only once each turn. I'm just gonna let that sink in for a bit. As a custom card designer myself, I am in awe of the beauty of the simplicity of this design, but it's so good. This means any of your mana dorks that tap to give you green are going to be able to untap, get a counter, then you can tap them again, so they're doubling their mana production. This means any of your elves you want attacking have pseudo-vigilance. They attack, they get a +1/+1 counter, and they're untapped for the rest of the turn cycle to be able to be blocking on your opponent's turns. It is perfectly accentuating what elves are best at, which is doing things by tapping. Generally, that's ramping you into something huge, which this can do. Or it could just be letting you attack with your wide board. If this only read, when your elves attacked, put a +1/+1 counter on each of them, I think that would still be really strong, because you're getting that +1/+1 counter that sticks around every turn that you attack with your creatures. But it does more than that. It doesn't care how they're being tapped. And it untaps them to let you block with them later. It just makes your elves so much better than they already were, so elegantly. This has been my top 10 Pauper Commander picks for Magic the Gathering Foundations. Although, mostly, it's for Magic the Gathering Foundations Jumpstart. I hope you have a lovely night, and I hope you check out some of these cards, because I think they're looking really sweet. And despite my qualms about Jumpstart, doing this has really made me just want to play some. It looks like it's going to be a really fun expansion to the game. But with that, we come to an end of Magic Foundations Pauper Commander review. I've been Darcy Bits. I'll see you next time. Have a great night.